Hi everybody, today's lesson is on completing the square. We are still doing parabolas. In fact, I think today's going to be our last day of parabolas. But completing the square is a topic from first semester, but a lot of us might have forgotten some of the steps. And to do it for parabolas is actually a little bit different. So I'm going to give you a second. If you need to pause the video, go ahead and copy down all 6 steps here. And I'm going to make some special emphases on number 4. Just because of how to remember how to complete the square, I guess. And then we've got a little trick that we have to focus on, multiplying by the coefficient that you factor out, so that a value that gets factored out. So copy that part down. Now I'm going to zoom over to example number 1, and I'm going to follow these steps in order, okay? So moving over to example number 1. The first thing is to move the constant over. And so the constant would be this 5, and that's the same thing that we did last semester when we completed the square. So I'm just going to subtract the 5 from both sides, and it's going to be y minus 5 on this side, just because I'm moving the 5 over. So that's just going to leave me with 2x squared plus 8x on this side. Okay, step 2 says to factor out the a value, and the a value would be the 2 on the right-hand side of our equation. I'm also going to put a blank in on each side just to get everything set up and ready to go. So I have a blank on my left-hand side. I'm going to take out the 2. That leaves me with x squared plus 4x, and I'm also going to put a blank on that side. Okay, so hopefully adding those blanks to both sides is maybe triggering some memories from first semester. And so half of b squared is what goes in the blank. So if you remember, half of 4 is 2. And then when you square it, that's what goes in the parentheses. Or that's what goes in the blank there, excuse me. And so now you might be thinking that we're supposed to add 4 to both sides. So think for a second about balancing the equation. Even though we added a 4 to the right-hand side, that 4 is actually being multiplied by this 2 here. So what did we actually add to the right-hand side? 4 times 2 if you distribute that 2. So we actually added 8 to both sides. So from here we're going to combine like terms on the left, and we're going to factor on the right. And hopefully you remember this from when we did completing the square last semester. But we've got y plus 3 over here after combining the negative 5 and the 8. I'm going to leave my 2 factored out. But the whole purpose of completing the square, you guys, is that I get to factor this thing into something squared. And what does it factor into? X squared plus 4x plus 4 is always x plus 2, the quantity squared. Okay, and so from there, now you can probably tell that we're getting really close to what it's looking like as vertex form for the parabola. So all I have to do is subtract the 3 so that I have y by itself. So I'm going to move the 3 over and just stick it on at the end. X plus 2 quantity squared minus 3. And so what we've done is we've taken this parabola, which originally started in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c, and we have put it into vertex form. Okay, so just remember our vertex here is going to be -2, -3. And I bet when I did my negative b over 2a up here, I got -8 over 2 times 2, which is -2. Did you know when you plug in that -2, you get -3? Okay, so we end up with the same exact parabola, just in 2 different forms. So the cool thing about completing the square is that now we get to take a standard form parabola and we get to turn it into vertex form. Alright, so let's try a couple more. Here's a sideways one. How do I know it's sideways? Because it's x equals, but it's going to work the same exact way. I'm going to move the 15 over first. So I have x plus 15 on this side, y squared minus 10y on this side. So if you remember, step 2, way up here, is that we have to factor out the a. Well, a is just 1 in this case, so we actually get to skip that step. For completing the square, the coefficient of the squared term has to be 1 in order to add the number to both sides and go through all the steps. In this case, the coefficient is 1, so we don't have to factor anything out. So I'm just going to add my blanks on both sides. And what number goes in the blank? Well, if you remember, you take half of -10, which is -5, and then square it, and you get 25. And I don't have to multiply anything by that 25 because the coefficient of the y squared is just 1, so it's going to be 25 on this side as well. So I'm adding the same number to both sides. Now I have some combining of like terms to do. I have x plus 40 on this side, and then factor the right. It ends up factoring into y minus 5 times y minus 5, so just write it as y minus 5, the quantity squared. Only other thing you need to do is move over the 40. y minus 5, quantity squared, minus 40. Okay, and let's think again for a second. I know that this is a sideways parabola. It's actually pointing to the right because the a value is positive, but what does this mean that my vertex is? Be very careful. It is not 5, negative 40. Remember, everything is flip-flopped when it's a sideways parabola. So my h is actually the negative 40, and my k is the opposite of the negative 5, so positive 5. So just be careful about that vertex. Remember, that's kind of the whole purpose of going from standard form to vertex form for a sideways parabola for sure. Okay? Let's try this next one. Okay, I'm going to start by moving over the 11. Here's a tip, actually, if you might want to pause the video and see if you can actually do this one on your own and then check your answer, or you could just walk through it with me step by step if you like to. So I'm going to move over the 11. I'm also going to factor out the negative 3. So be careful when you factor out that negative 3, it changes the sign of the 6. If you need to check your work, then you can distribute the negative 3 and make sure you end up with negative 3x squared plus 6x. But when you take out that negative, it affects the sign of the 6x. So let's put our blank on each side. And yes, the blank always goes in the parentheses because we're going to multiply it by that coefficient to begin with. So I'm going to take half of negative 2, which is negative 1, and square it, which gives me 1. But hey, remember, just like that first example we did, in order to balance these equations, we actually have 1 times negative 3. So that means that I have to do a negative 3 on this side. And it's negative 3 just because the a value in this case is negative 3. So now I have a lot of like terms to combine. I have y minus 14 on the left. Keep that negative 3 factored out. I'm just going to factor the inside of the parentheses here, which is x minus 1 quantity squared. And now again, last but not least, all I have to do is move over the 14. X minus 1 squared plus 14. So here we have a normal, quote-unquote, parabola. It is pointing down because the a value is negative, and my vertex for this one is going to be opposite same, so 1, 14. Alright guys, so we're just going to do one graphing example. So the whole point here of completing the square, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to learn all these forms? Well, because negative b over 2a doesn't work for a sideways parabola, okay? That's why we have to actually put each parabola into vertex form, like it says up here, by completing the square. And I have to do that so that I know what the vertex is. There is no negative b over 2a when it's a sideways parabola, so just kind of keep that in mind and beware. So we have to actually complete the square for these horizontal parabolas in order to figure out what the vertex is, okay? So here we go with another completing the square. I'm actually going to kind of write it over here. I'm going to start by adding the 6 to both sides. Negative y squared plus 4y. Yeah, here's something weird. That negative y squared, that negative sign does need to be factored out. So the coefficient of y squared has to be positive 1 in order to do all the completing the square stuff. So I do need to factor out that negative sign, which is also going to change the sign of the 4y. So I'm going to do that and add the blank on both sides. Negative parentheses. Y squared minus 4y plus blank. Okay, be very, very careful. When you take out that negative sign, it also affects the 4y. So what we're going to do is we're going to take half of negative 4, which is negative 2, and square it. That gives us 4. Very careful adding the same number to both sides. This 4 gets multiplied by this negative 1, which causes me to add a negative 4 to the left-hand side. Okay, so now I have some combining like terms and some factoring to do. So I have x plus 2 on the left equals negative the quantity y minus 2 squared. So now all I have to do is move the 2 over. So I have x equals negative quantity y minus 2 squared minus 2. And remember, this means my vertex equals this number and then the opposite of this number. So I have negative 2 comma 2 for my vertex. So that's what's going to go in this first blank. Negative 2 comma 2. It is sideways. It's a horizontal parabola because it's x equals. And the fact that it's negative tells me that it opens left. My a is negative 1, which means my p, if I do a equals 1 over 4p, put negative 1 in for A. That makes negative 4p equals 1, p equals negative 1/4. Okay, so we've got that. That's from several days ago. Axis, focus, directrix, I'll do that in a second, but what I want to do is move over to my graph. I'm going to put the vertex negative 2, comma 2 on there. I'm going to do a real quick t-chart just to get a couple other values to plug in. And just remember, when you're plugging in your values in your t-chart, you're picking your numbers for y because you're plugging it into the vertex form for y. So I'm also going to do 1 and 3. When I do 3, I get negative 1 minus 2, so negative 3. Negative 3 for both, negative 3 comma 1, negative 3 comma 3. And I was just plugging that y value into the vertex form. You could also plug it into the standard form, doesn't matter, you get the same number either way. But remember, my p-value was negative 1/4, and the only reason it was negative is because that means I need to move left from the vertex. My focus is going to be right here, directrix on the other side, 1/4 of a unit away. So looking at the graph, I can probably now figure out my axis of symmetry, my focus, and my directrix. Zoom out just a tiny little bit there. Axis of symmetry is just the line that cuts the parabola symmetrically right in half. So that's the horizontal line, so it's y equals 2. And yeah, that's always the same as the y value of the vertex for the horizontal parabolas. The focus, I went past negative 2. I went 1/4 of a unit past negative 2. So negative 2 and 1/4, comma, the y value is the same as the vertex, so 2. And then the directrix is a vertical line, so it's x equals. And that vertex, or that directrix is 1/4 of a unit shy of negative 2, so it's actually negative 1 3/4. Okay, you guys, so we learned how to put a parabola from standard form into vertex form. It's really important for horizontal parabolas. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.